I had the perfect podcast all ready to go. Parables from Matthew 13, historical context, a plan for church growth, personal stories that I tied it all together with, except none of it tied together. 90 minutes later, and I had nothing. No plan. Nothing to actually present today. The plane had just run out of gas and crashed. What went wrong?
The Fresh Church Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Fresh Church Podcast. Today I want to ask, why is it important to put together a plan in order to grow your church? Does the Bible have any tips that'll help you out? Yes. Then what do I need to do? Well, this morning I woke up with one task. I needed to write and film the podcast for today. As a pastor and ministry leader, I'm sure you felt the pressure that I'm talking about. You know, the infamous, I need to write my sermon, my lesson, my article, my fill in the blank. You have one goal, one purpose, and you start in on it. 2 hours later, you're sitting there with a collection of crazy ideas and no semblance of order, a whole message that you can't even use, and no way to redeem your time. Do you know what I'm talking about? You see, I got an idea in my Bible reading time yesterday for a podcast. I mean, an incredible podcast. A podcast that will be the greatest podcast ever. Well, I had an idea for a podcast, okay? I was reading in Matthew chapter 13. And in this chapter, we hear 6 different parables by Jesus about the kingdom. And as I was reading my Bible, there were some specific lines that stood out to me that I'd never noticed before. So I got to work. And so this morning, I built up a chapter by chapter layout of Matthew. I read the passages and tied it into the other parables that were there. I was teaching on church growth. We're going to look at the parable of the sower. You remember that one, right? The guy who was sowing seeds and there was rocky soil and soil with weeds and a hard pathway and then the beautiful dirt that gave him a huge harvest. There are all kinds of things that people want to hear when we talk about church growth, and hearing about 30, 60, 100-fold is a good thing, right? Now, the next parable tells us that sometimes the enemy throws weeds into that harvest. So you let God take care of that, because one tiny seed, like a mustard seed, parable number 3, grows into a tree that birds make their nests in. And we have the parable of the yeast and discovering a treasure and catching fish in nets and on. And I was tying them all together and sharing stories about planting a garden in the backyard and the tomatoes that I was growing. And I was talking about the challenges pastors go through and what God really wants us to be doing. And all of this was going to lead to some incredible insights that would help you as a pastor or church leader grow your church. An hour and a half go by, and I realized that, to use another analogy, I've taken off. I've set off towards a destination, but I just couldn't fly this plane. I mean, I was flying in circles. I was changing the design of the plane every few minutes. I was looking for a better runway. I was trying to figure out what this whole thing even looked like when suddenly I realized I ran out of gas and crashed the whole thing into a side of a mountain. Who could relate to that? 90 minutes. 6 pages of notes, nothing. I went down so many tangents and rabbit trails and pulled out ideas that were nowhere in the text. I even wrote a whole paragraph on the calling of Matthew, which has absolutely nothing to do with our talk today. I closed my computer in frustration and I jumped in the shower. My second shower of the day. I'm feeling really clean, by the way. If you remember from some of my previous talks, I clear my head best. I hear from God by either taking a shower or going for a walk. Well, it's raining and cold outside today. So I picked shower number 2. And as I stood under the water in frustration, I heard that still small voice remind me of what he had prompted in my spirit yesterday in the first place. The whole idea that I had yesterday came back to me. And then I remember something I tell people all the time in my coaching, whether I'm coaching new kids directors, family pastors with years of experience, or lead pastors from an executive perspective. I will share this. Plan your work, then work your plan. So let's do that. I went back to my computer and I started all over again. And we're going to start where God first inspired me in the Bible. Matthew chapter 13. And here's what we see. Later that same day, Jesus left the house and sat beside the lake. A large crowd soon gathered around him, so he got into a boat and he sat there and taught as the people stood on the shore. He told many stories in the form of parables, such as this one. Listen, a farmer went out to plant some seeds. As he scattered them across his field, some seeds fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate them. Other seeds fell on shallow soil with underlying rock, and the seeds sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow. But the plants soon wilted under the hot sun. Since they didn't have deep roots, they died. Other seeds fell among thorns that grew up and choked out the tender plants. Still other seeds fell on fertile soil, and they produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much had been planted. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Now, having been a kids pastor, a family pastor, an executive pastor, I have read this parable many times. I've taught this parable many times. This is a great story, right? As a kid, I would tell this to others. But you know, one of the key things about the Bible is every time you read it, it comes to life again. And as I was reading this, one particular line jumped off the page as the Holy Spirit was speaking to me. In verse 4, it says this, and he scattered them across his field. I want to say that again. It was his field, not someone else's. He was completely responsible for this field. He knew what kind of soil he had. He knew there was rocky soil. He knew there was thorn bushes. He knew there was a path that went right through the middle of that field. He knew there was some good soil as well. But he didn't pick and choose where he planted the seed. He just scattered it all over the place. He started throwing a handful of seeds out there. He was sowing his field. He had a plan, and he worked it. You see, now, when Jesus explains the parable of the sower to his disciples a couple verses later, he reveals that he's talking about people who listen to the good news and their response to it. Now, Jesus had a 3-year plan. Share about the kingdom, perform some signs and wonders, develop a group of disciples who follow him, and then provide himself as a sacrifice for our sins and return us into that eternal relationship with Father God. He was throwing seed all over the place, knowing that it wasn't going to be received by everybody. He had a plan, and he was doing it. So now, we could pick on this farmer for not prepping his soil beforehand, before he sowed those seeds, for not being a good steward of that seed and only putting it in the good places, not the bad places, for not weeding his garden or chasing away those birds or transplanting those cute little plants to better soil. No, he had a plan, and he worked his plan. Pastor, you have a field. You have authority over that field. You need to have a plan for that field. Now, that plan could have been the same plan that you had last year or a brand new one. That plan could have come from somebody else or someplace else. That plan could have come from a time of prayer and fasting. That plan could have come from a crazy nightmare. Hopefully not. But put together a plan. And I used to always say that God has a plan for your church in your community at this time. And it's your job to find out what that plan is. Not the plan that everyone else around you is using. What's the plan that God has for you? And I believe whatever that plan is, it can work within the philosophy of a focus, a family relationship, experience, safety, and hope. That philosophy is like the boundaries around your property. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna grow some corn in there, and I'm gonna do it using family relationship, experience, safety, and hope. So let's look at part of that passage again. You see there at the end of verse 3, verse 4, you see this. Listen. A farmer went out to plant some seeds, and as he scattered them across the field, we see what happens. There's different soil that it falls on. There's different things that happen to them. And we see at the end of verse 8, still other seeds fell on fertile soil, and they produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as he had planted. There was a harvest, even though not all of the seeds turned out the way that it was intended to. But the harvest was so great that it more than replaced the seeds that didn't grow. He had a plan, God took care of the rest. Then I look through the rest of the parables in this passage and I see, well, it starts off with a farmer who sows seeds in his field and he gets a huge harvest. And then the next parable, there's a farmer who sows and has a field, but his enemy at night comes and scatters weeds in the midst of it. And he trusts God and God takes care of it and he gets his harvest and God gets rid of the rest of it. Then in the third parable, we see a guy with a tiny seed, a mustard seed, and that little seed, it turns into a giant tree that becomes a place that houses birds. He just planted a seed and look, and he created a birdhouse. Okay, God knew what he was doing. Number 4, a little leaven causes that whole loaf to rise. So there was a plan. He put some leaven in the dough, and all of a sudden, oh, you have some yummy, gooey bread. So good. Parable number 5, a parable about hidden treasures. And this guy, he sells everything. He gives it all away, whatever he's got to do to buy this land. Because on this land, there's a treasure that he has to have. There was a plan to it. And then he worked the plan. He went out and he bought that treasure. And finally, we see a parable about a fisherman that throws out a net and he collects some good fish and some trash fish all in one big harvest and pulls a fish in and then he separates them. There's a plan. Catch a bunch of fish with a net and then harvest it. Work the plan. It's like Pastor Tony writing a podcast. You got to plan your work and then work the plan. Instead, I was acting like that dog in that Disney movie that's like, squirrel, squirrel. I mean, I was all over the place. So you want to know what the key to church growth is? It's actually kind of simple. Here's 3 things that'll help you. The key to church growth is 1, understand it's your field. You have a responsibility to sow seeds, to plant for a harvest. So put together a plan accordingly. Well, what are we going to do this year? And if you're not a visionary person, well, then surround yourself with a couple of visionary people. And if you're a visionary person, surround yourself with a couple people that'll maybe tame down some of your ideas and make them practical. The bottom line is put together a plan. And if you need some help, get it. Call me. I can help point you in the right direction. The second thing, you have to sow the seed. You have to work that plan. I mean, you already put a plan together, so now do it. Well, like for example, you determine that you're going to help your church understand love. So when they interact with people in the community, they exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. So you're going to teach them how to make friends and accept people as part of the family. Or maybe you're purposing to create relational activities that introduce community people to your church, such as Sunday morning's not the primary introduction point. So maybe some dinner small groups, some coffee connection points, some special events that you invite your new friends to, your new family to come hang out together. And they don't have to be super spiritual. I mean, do axe throwing, do scrapbooking, do miniature golf, hang out with people. Or maybe you're redesigning your Sunday experience. I mean, it focuses on worship and remembering his word, but you need to create some wow factor to it that people want to keep coming back. And we realize you're not a Taylor Swift concert, but you can still do some things that get people's attention. Or perhaps it's creating that safe environment and processes in your church. Your kids and student ministry areas need to be safe. That you have best practice for your churches as far as accountability for finances and facilities and personal information, boundaries to keep people from being injured or sued. Maybe you need to work on a plan for sharing hope with your people, that they can grow into the beautiful plant that God has called them, God's designed them to be. There's a discipleship pathway with ways for people to discover where they can serve and how they can make friends and love others to become part of the church family. You start doing the plan that you put together. The third thing, you got to wait for the harvest. I mean, you planned your work, you worked your plan. Now be patient. Sometimes that's the hardest part. None of those plans are going to work. Not every seed is going to sprout, but the ones that do, 30, 60, 100 times as much as you could have ever imagined. Because that is what happens when a seed grows properly. Pastors will spend 80% of their time trying to salvage these dying seedlings when Jesus says, just stick to the plan. So let me explain. Let me put it this way. Every year, we go on a major cross-country trip as a family to visit national parks. And in order to do this, there's some planning and preparation that has to go into it. I mean, we can plan some impulsiveness within it, but there's still a plan. Now I like to fly by the seat of my pants, and I want to get the greatest experience that I can when I get there. So I've realized I have to plan some spontaneity, but I've also got to create a plan so I can get the best out of it. So before we ever go on vacation, we make a plan. Where do we want to go? When do we want to go there? What route are we going to take to get there? So I've been planning a trip from Ohio to Yellowstone National Park with a day in the Grand Tetons as well. And I determined early on that we wanted to spend 2 or 3 days in Yellowstone to get the full effect of it. So we decided to drive out there because there's two parks in the Badlands of South Dakota that we've not been to yet. And by the way, I'm not getting sponsored in any way by the national park systems, but if they'd like to give us a lifetime membership for giving a plug right here, I'll gladly take it. But anyways, I put a plan together. We created something. How long is it going to take? How far are we going to make it each day? How can we take advantage of the calendar to optimize the number of days my wife has to take off from work? Can I tie any speaking or ministry opportunities into this trip? And if so, how will that affect the trip? I literally create a daily schedule with hotel reservations done in advance, mileage aspects on there. We budget how much food we'll spend each day based on the locations. We create a thorough plan. Now, we used to drive until we needed a hotel and hope for the best. We used to just show up and whatever we could find, we had fun doing it. We realized without a plan, there was a lot more fighting in the car, if you know what I mean. So once we had a plan, we'll look it over numerous times and make some slight adjustments. We plan our trip. Then we work the plan. We know what we're doing each day, and when we have downtime or long drive days or 5-mile hikes, we're aware of it ahead of time. And we know if we mess with the plan too much, it's going to change the dynamics of the trip, probably make it so we miss out on something. So let's get practical for a minute. I mean, it's easy to say plan your work your plan, but it sounds like a lot of work. Well, let's make that work a little easier for you. What does it mean, and where do you start? Well, first, let's make sure you're starting in your field, okay? Don't evaluate everybody else's field out there. Start first with your field. So the first assignment I give someone when they start coaching with us is I have them do an assessment. And now they can either pay me to come out and do it with them, or I can provide them with a version that they can do on their own, just to kind of help them out. And ask them questions about areas in their ministry based on the core values of Fresh: family, relationship, experience, safety, and hope. Questions like, are there clear indicators of family ministry experiences for kids and students? What's your signage, bulletin, flyers, website look like? There's a question about, do small groups promote community or education? Or what was the wow factor that would make someone want to return? How about a question like this? Do I feel safe? Is there a security team in place? Are there security measures? Are there evacuation plans posted? Do you have enough volunteers and leaders? And are people in the right places? And then I ask this question, what's the discipleship pathway? Now, we've worked through some of these things and we're working in areas that you need help. But as you look over it, you go, these are my top 2 or 3 or 4 things that I think we're doing really well. And these are the top things that we really need to work on. And that's where we create a plan. Several years ago, I learned the importance of an action plan. This is where you discover the most important thing that needs your attention and what steps you're going to do to correct them. And so you go through this assessment, you find the themes that seem to run throughout it, and you group them together. And you may notice, for example, there'd be a lot of comments about your facility. Well, then that would mean you need to move people around or redesign the rooms that you have. It could be as simple as a new coat of paint, or it might need a complete overhaul. Or maybe you notice that volunteers are high on the list. So whether it's developing the people you have or adding a new force of new people, are you ready for growth? Do you have events planned or environments engaging new families? What happens if you have to add services or expand the areas that you have? And of course, some of the safety challenges that you're facing, maybe that came up. You might have all the basics covered, but you could be looking at a lawsuit waiting to happen in some other areas. Look through it all and discover the 3 most important things you want to tackle over the next 30 days and write them down. Now, take these points and create a plan while using action steps. And the key is you can only pick 3 things at a time. So pick the most important 3 things and write them down. Then I create maybe a 60 and 90-day plan as well, so I know where I'm going down the road. These are the next things that I'm going to work on. And so that means, hey, if I get done early, I can jump to the next thing. Or if I need to push something back, I'm aware of it accordingly. But don't try to tackle 9 different areas. Take those 3 areas and put 3 steps to each one of them. So that could be something like this. Maybe for the first 30 days, I'm going to clean and decorate the nursery. And then the next 30 days, I'm going to do some redesigning with the stages in each of the youth and kids ministry classrooms and help the upfront and parents look better. And maybe over the next 90 days, I plan on completely redoing our welcome area in the lobby and create a welcoming environment for everyone who comes in. Congratulations, you just made a plan with actionable steps attached to it that will help you work your plan. Hold yourself accountable to it and move forward accordingly. Time to sow some seeds. So I've shared this before, but it's worth sharing again. Indeed.com provided me with a great plan that I've used over the years. They use this acronym of SMART when they're talking about action plans. And so SMART, when you break it down, SMART, S specific. Set a specific target that you're shooting for. What are you planning for? Something specific that you can hold yourself accountable to. Second, measurable. Have a concrete goal. Don't say, we'll add volunteers. Define what it is. How many volunteers and what areas? Specific, measurable, attainable. Can you get it done with the resources that you have in the time you have? You can't redo the whole lobby in 30 days if you haven't put together a plan of how it's going to affect the other ministries. How are you going to raise the money for it? What's it even going to look like? Make sure it's attainable. Is it relevant? Does it line up with the direction your ministry and the church is going? I'm talking to a church right now that's adding a whole wing on their building specifically to help kids with special needs because that's important to the mission and vision of their church. Then it makes sense. It's relevant. And the last one is time-based. Have a target end date and reevaluate everything based on that date. Are we going to get it done in time? Let's put those action steps together as we plant those seeds. So today, I want to leave you, and I want to remind you of just a real simple thing. Plan your work your plan, then wait. That's one of the ways that we help leaders when we coach them. We help them determine the best idea for their field. We help them put together that plan, the action plan. Then we actually do the plan, slightly adjusting along the way if we need to. Then we'll wait to see what happens while we put together the next step in our plan. You see, that's why everyone needs a coach. It's your field. It's your dirt. These are the God seeds that you're spreading. Do what he's calling you to do. Put a plan together. Do that plan. Wait for the reward. I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 15:58. So my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless. Or as my mom would say in the King James Version, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain. Are you ready to see a harvest? Well, plan your work your plan, and let's see what God does. Let's get to it.